The stars looked different through the windows of the Star Runner. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the swirling colors of space as his ship moved through hyperspace. He had been exploring space for 15 years, but this mission felt special. "Captain," called Dr. Amy Collins from her station. "We're getting close to the target system." Jake nodded. Amy was the best scientist on his ship. She studied old alien cities and ruins. Her job was to find clues about civilizations that had died out long ago. Today, they were heading to a planet that their sensors had found 3 weeks ago. "Drop us out of hyperspace, Zektar," Jake ordered. The ship's navigator was a tall, green-skinned alien called Acrylion. Zektar had tough scales like a lizard and was very strong. His people were known as great warriors across the galaxy. "Yes, Captain," Zektar said in his deep voice. His clawed hands moved over the controls. The ship shook slightly as it dropped back into normal space. Jake looked at the main screen. In front of them was a brown and gray planet. It looked dead and empty. No green plants, no blue oceans, just rock and dust. "Scans show no life signs," reported Velona, their communications officer. She was a Silithai, tall and thin with pale blue skin that seemed to glow softly. Her people could read minds and move things without touching them. "But there are structures on the surface." "Structures?" Amy asked, getting excited. "What kind of structures?" Velona closed her large, dark eyes and concentrated. "Old buildings. Very old. They cover most of the main continent." Jake felt his heart beat faster. Finding ruins of dead civilizations was always exciting, but also dangerous. Sometimes these places had traps or weapons that still worked. "Commander Carter," Jake called to his security chief, "get a team ready. We're going down to take a look." Ben Carter was a big man with short brown hair and serious eyes. He had served in the military before joining Jake's crew. He always made sure everyone stayed safe. "Already on it, Captain," Ben said. "I'll take Johnson and Martinez with us." Amy grabbed her equipment bag. "I'm coming too." This could be the discovery of a lifetime. 2 hours later, their shuttle landed on the planet's surface. The air was thin but breathable. The sky was a strange orange color, and 2 small suns hung low on the horizon. As they walked away from the shuttle, Jake could not believe what he saw. Huge stone buildings stretched as far as he could see. Tall towers reached toward the sky. Wide roads connected different parts of the city. But everything was empty and covered in dust. "These buildings are at least 10,000 years old," Amy said, running her scanner over a nearby wall. "Maybe older." Zektar picked up a piece of broken stone. Even though he was very strong, he handled it carefully. "Who built all this?" "I don't know," Amy said. "But they were advanced. Look at how perfectly these stones fit together. No mortar, no gaps." They walked deeper into the city. The buildings got bigger and more impressive. Some had carvings on them that Amy photographed with her camera. The writing was unlike anything in their databases. "Captain," Velona said softly, "I sense something ahead. Something important." She pointed to a massive building in the center of the city. It was shaped like a pyramid, but with flat sides covered in strange symbols. Steps led up to a dark entrance. "That's definitely a temple," Amy said. "The most important building in any ancient city." Ben checked his weapon. "Could be dangerous. We should be careful." Jake nodded. "Amy, you lead the way. But if anything seems wrong, we leave immediately." They climbed the stone steps. Each step was carved with different symbols. Amy stopped to photograph each one. At the top, the entrance was a tall archway leading into darkness. Ben turned on his flashlight and went in first. The others followed. Inside, the air was cool and still. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. The hallway led to a large round room. In the center stood a platform made of crystal that glowed with soft white light. On top of the platform was something that made them all stop and stare. A sword. It was stuck point down in the crystal platform. The blade was made of dark metal that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams. The handle was wrapped in leather that still looked new despite the thousands of years. Strange symbols ran down the blade. "Incredible," Amy whispered. She walked slowly around the platform, taking pictures from every angle. The preservation is perfect. Zektar stepped closer. It looks like a weapon made for war. But why leave it here? Ben asked. Who puts a sword in a temple? Amy studied the walls around the platform. They were covered in writing in several different languages. Some she recognized as dead alien languages from her studies. I can read parts of this, she said, pointing to one section. Something about a chosen one and strength of spirit. Velona reached out with her mind, trying to sense the sword's history. She pulled her hand back quickly. There is great power in that weapon. And great sadness. Jake looked at his team. What do you think? Should we try to remove it? The scientific value would be enormous, Amy said. But we need to be careful. This could be a trap. Zektar flexed his powerful arms. If it's just stuck, I can pull it free. Wait, Ben said. We should scan it first. Make sure it's not going to explode or something. They spent an hour scanning the sword and the platform. Everything seemed safe. The crystal was just crystal. The sword showed no signs of being a weapon beyond its obvious design. I think it's safe, Amy finally said. But we should document everything before we touch it. After taking hundreds of photos and detailed scans, Jake gave Zektar permission to try removing the sword. The big Krillian walked up to the platform. He wrapped both hands around the sword's handle. His muscles bulged as he pulled. Nothing happened. He tried again, pulling even harder. His scales turned darker as he strained. Still nothing. Let me try, Velona said. She placed her hands near the sword and concentrated. Her telekinetic powers could move heavy objects without touching them. But the sword didn't even wiggle. Ben tried next, then Amy. No matter how hard they pulled or what method they used, the sword would not move. It's like it's part of the crystal, Ben said, breathing hard from his effort. Jake stared at the sword. Something about it felt familiar, but he couldn't say what. We'll camp here tonight, he decided. Tomorrow we'll bring more equipment and try again. As they set up their camp in the temple, none of them noticed the way the sword symbols seemed to glow a little brighter when Jake looked at it, or how the crystal hummed so softly that only someone listening very carefully would hear it. The ancient temple kept its secrets, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. News of the sword spread quickly through the galaxy. Within a week, 3 more ships arrived at the dead planet. Jake Morrison watched them land from the temple steps, feeling worried about what was coming. The first ship was huge and black. It belonged to the Ursine hegemony. The second was sleek and silver, carrying representatives from the Cerebral Collective. The third ship was the most advanced Jake had ever seen, with smooth curves and no visible weapons. It carried nobles from the Synth Empire. This is not good, Ben Carter said, checking his weapon for the 10th time that morning. Too many powerful people in one place. Dr. Amy Collins was still working on translating the temple writings. She had found references to ancient wars and something called the Great Darkness. But much of it was still unclear. Captain, Velona reported from her communication station. All 3 ships are requesting permission to enter the temple. Jake sighed. He couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. His small exploration ship was no match for the warships now in orbit. Tell them they can come, but no weapons inside the temple. The first to arrive was War Chief Grant of the Ursine hegemony. He was nearly 8 feet tall and covered in thick brown fur. His people looked like giant bears that walked on 2 legs. They were known throughout the galaxy as the strongest warriors. Grant's voice was deep and rumbling. Human Captain, we have come to claim the ancient weapon. Behind him walked 6 more Ursines, each one huge and powerful. They looked at the humans like they were looking at children. The sword chooses who can lift it, Jake said calmly. You're welcome to try. Next came Sage Krineth of the Cerebrals. His people had evolved past the need for strong bodies. Krineth was thin and pale, with a head twice the size of a human's. His brain was so advanced that he could read minds from miles away and solve complex math problems in seconds. Such primitive thinking, Krineth said, his voice echoing inside everyone's head instead of coming from his mouth. The sword is obviously locked by a mental puzzle. I will solve it easily. The last group to enter was led by Lady Nyxera of the Synth Empire. Her people had replaced their natural bodies with perfect machines thousands of years ago. She looked like a beautiful human woman made of silver and gold, with glowing blue eyes. "How quaint," she said in a voice like music. "A simple mechanical lock that our technology will bypass in moments." Amy watched all three groups with growing concern. "Jake," she whispered, "I don't think this is about strength or intelligence or technology." "What do you mean?" he asked. She showed him her tablet with the translated text. "Look at this passage. It talks about the fire within and one who stands for others. This isn't a test of power." But the aliens were not interested in Amy's translations. War Chief Grant stepped up to the crystal platform first. "I am the strongest warrior of the strongest species," he declared. "This blade will serve the hegemony well." He grabbed the sword's handle with both massive hands. His muscles bulged under his fur as he pulled. The other Ursines cheered him on, but the sword did not move even slightly. Grant tried different angles, different grips. He even had two of his warriors help him pull. Nothing worked. After an hour, he stepped back, breathing hard and angry. "The weapon is cursed," he growled. Sage Crineth approached next. "Such crude methods. Watch and learn." He closed his huge eyes and concentrated. The air around the sword began to shimmer as his powerful mind focused on it. Everyone could feel the mental pressure as he tried to unlock whatever was holding the sword in place. Minutes passed. Sweat appeared on Crinetha's pale forehead. Other cerebrals joined their mental power to his. The temple itself seemed to vibrate with their combined psychic energy. But the sword remained perfectly still. "Impossible," Crineth gasped, opening his eyes. "There is no mental lock. No puzzle to solve. It simply refuses." Lady Nyxera laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Both of your methods are outdated. Observe true advancement." She produced a small device that projected a blue light over the sword. Dozens of scanning beams examined every inch of the weapon and the crystal platform. "Ancient technology," she announced. "But technology nonetheless. My people mastered such things before your civilizations existed." For the next 2 hours, she and her team used every advanced tool they had. They tried to hack the crystal's molecular structure. They attempted to override whatever systems might be controlling the sword. They even tried to disintegrate the crystal around it. Nothing worked. As the day wore on, tensions grew between the groups. The Ursines blamed the Cerebrals for interfering with psychic energy. The Cerebrals accused the Synths of disrupting their mental work with their machines. The Synths looked down on both groups as primitive. "This is becoming dangerous," Ben warned Jake quietly. "One of these groups might decide to take the sword by force." Jake nodded. He could see weapons being checked and battle stances being taken. The temple that had been peaceful for thousands of years was about to become a battlefield. Meanwhile, Amy continued working on the ancient writings. She had found something interesting in a section that the aliens had ignored. It was written in a script so old that her computer could barely translate it. "Jake, look at this," she said urgently. "This part talks about the civilization that built this temple. They weren't conquerors or empire builders. They were protectors. Protectors of what? Other species. Weaker civilizations that couldn't defend themselves. This whole planet was like a military base, but they used it to help people, not to attack them." Jake felt something click in his mind. So the sword wasn't made for conquest. Exactly. It was made for defense. For someone who would use it to protect others, not to gain power. As if responding to their conversation, the sword's symbols began to glow slightly brighter. The crystal platform hummed so softly that only Amy, who was standing closest, could hear it. "Did you see that?" she asked excitedly. But before Jake could answer, War Chief Grant's voice boomed through the temple. "Enough of this foolishness. If none of us can claim the weapon fairly, then we will settle this by combat." The other leaders agreed. Soon, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were preparing for war over a sword that none of them could even touch. Jake looked at his small team of humans standing in the middle of it all. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely out of their league. But something Amy had translated kept running through his mind. The ancient builders had faced impossible odds too. They had been surrounded by enemies stronger and more advanced than themselves. But they had found a way to protect not just themselves, but everyone who couldn't protect themselves. Maybe the sword wasn't waiting for the strongest or smartest being in the galaxy. Maybe it was waiting for someone who understood what the ancient builders had really stood for. As the aliens prepared for battle, Jake wondered if a simple human might be the key to solving this 10,000-year-old puzzle. The temple shook as the three alien factions prepared their weapons outside. War Chief Grant had called his warriors from the ship. Sage Crineth had summoned more cerebrals to join their mental attack force. Lady Nixera activated battle robots that appeared from her vessel like silver ghosts. Jake Morrison stood with his small human crew in the center of the temple, watching the ancient sword that had started this conflict. Dr. Amy Collins was still working frantically to translate more of the wall writings. "Captain," Ben Carter said, "we need to evacuate. When these three groups start fighting, this temple won't be safe." "Wait," Amy said urgently. "I found something important. This section talks about how the sword works." Jake moved closer to read over her shoulder. "What does it say?" "The builders called themselves Guardians. They protected weaker species from something called the Shadow Swarm. But they knew they would eventually lose, so they built this temple as a test." "A test for what?" "For someone who would continue their mission. Someone who would use the sword not for personal glory, but to protect others." Outside, they could hear Grant roaring orders to his warriors. Energy weapons were charging up. The battle was about to begin. "That's all very interesting," Ben said, "but right now we need to get out of here before we get caught in the crossfire." Jake was about to agree when young Danny Walsh spoke up. Danny was their ship's engineer, barely 25 years old. He had been quietly helping Amy with her work for the past few days. "Dr. Collins," Danny said, "what if the test isn't about being worthy? What if it's about having the right reason?" Amy looked at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" "Well, everyone who's tried to lift the sword wanted it for power. The Ursines want it to make them stronger warriors. The Cerebrals want it to prove they're smarter. The Synths want it because they think they deserve it." "And your point is?" Ben asked. Danny looked nervous but continued. "What if the sword only responds to someone who wants it for the same reason the Guardians did? To protect people." Before anyone could respond, an explosion shook the temple. The battle outside had begun. Energy beams flashed through the entrance, lighting up the walls with violent colors. "We have to move the sword," Amy said suddenly. "If the temple gets damaged, we could lose it forever." Jake nodded. "She's right. This is the greatest archaeological discovery in galactic history. We can't let it get destroyed in this fight." They hurried to the crystal platform. The sword seemed to glow brighter as they approached, as if responding to the danger around it. "How do we move it if none of us can lift it?" Ben asked. "Maybe we can move the whole platform," Danny suggested. "I have some anti-grav units on the shuttle that might work." Another explosion rocked the temple, closer this time. Dust fell from the ceiling, and cracks appeared in some of the ancient walls. Danny ran toward the temple entrance to get his equipment, but he stopped suddenly. Through the doorway, he could see the battle raging outside. Ursine warriors were fighting synth robots while cerebral psychic blasts lit up the sky. In the middle of it all, he saw something that made his heart stop. A small figure was trapped behind a collapsed pillar. It was one of the young Ursine cubs who had come with the expedition. The child was hurt and scared, crying for help in a voice too young for war. "Someone's trapped out there," Danny called back to the others. Ben looked through his binoculars. "It's just one of the Ursine kids. Their own people will get him." But as they watched, it became clear that the adult Ursines were too busy fighting to notice the trapped child. The battle was moving closer to where the cub was hiding. Danny felt something twist in his stomach. He thought about his little sister back on Earth, how scared she got during thunderstorms. This alien child was probably feeling the same fear, but 1,000 times worse. "I have to help him," Danny said. "Are you crazy?" Ben grabbed his arm. "You'll get killed out there. Those weapons don't care if you're trying to help." "But he's just a kid," Danny said. "And he's scared." Jake put his hand on Danny's shoulder. "It's too dangerous, son. I can't let you risk it." Danny looked at Jake, then at Amy, then at the sword glowing on its crystal platform. Something in his mind clicked, like a key turning in a lock. "The Guardians would have helped him," he said quietly. Before anyone could stop him, Danny ran toward the temple entrance. But instead of going outside, he turned to the sword. "If you really were made to protect people," he said to the ancient weapon, "then help me protect that child." He reached out and grabbed the sword's handle. The temple filled with brilliant white light. The sword lifted from the crystal platform as easily as picking up a feather. Danny felt warmth flow through his hands and up his arms, not painful but powerful, like holding sunlight. Amy gasped. Ben's mouth fell open. Jake could only stare as the young engineer held the legendary weapon that had defeated every mighty alien who had tried to claim it. "How?" Jake whispered. But Danny was already moving. With the sword in his hand, he felt different. Stronger, but not in a physical way. More confident, more determined. Like he could face anything if it meant protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. He ran outside into the battle. Energy beams flew past him, but somehow none of them hit him. He reached the trapped ursine cub just as a damaged robot was about to fall on the child. Danny swung the sword. The ancient blade cut through the robot like it was made of paper. He pulled the frightened cub to safety behind a stronger pillar. "Are you hurt?" he asked in the simple ursine language he had learned. The child shook his head, too scared to speak. "Stay here," Danny said gently. "I'll get you back to your family." The fighting stopped. Every warrior, every robot, every psychic blast froze in place as they stared at the young human holding the glowing sword. Warchief Grant's massive jaw dropped. Sage Krinetha's huge eyes went wide. Lady Nixera's perfect face showed actual surprise for the first time in centuries. Danny helped the ursine cub to his feet and walked him over to Grant. The massive war chief knelt down to check on the child, his fierce expression softening with relief. "You saved my nephew," Grant said, his voice full of wonder. "But how did you lift the weapon that defeated me?" Danny looked down at the sword in his hand. It felt warm and comfortable, like it belonged there. "I think," he said slowly, "it doesn't care how strong you are. It cares why you want to use it." Sage Krineth approached, his mental voice gentle now instead of arrogant. The ancient writings spoke of worthiness, but we all assumed it meant power. "Power to do what?" Lady Nixera asked, her musical voice thoughtful. Amy had followed Danny outside and heard the conversation. "To protect others," she said, reading from her tablet. "The Guardians didn't use this sword to conquer enemies. They used it to defend people who couldn't defend themselves." Danny looked at the three alien leaders who had been ready to kill each other moments before. "Maybe that's why none of you could lift it. You all wanted it to make yourselves stronger. But it was made for someone who would make others safer." The temple's glow grew brighter as Danny Walsh held the ancient sword. The crystal platform where the weapon had rested for thousands of years began to change, rising from the floor and unfolding like a flower made of light. "Everyone back away from the platform," Jake Morrison ordered. His crew and the alien leaders quickly moved to the temple walls. The crystal structure continued to grow, creating a complex pattern of glowing panels and floating symbols. Amy Collins frantically took pictures and scanned everything with her equipment. "It's some kind of control system," she said in amazement. "But more advanced than anything I've ever seen." Danny felt the sword pulling him toward the crystal display. As he approached, the symbols began to move and rearrange themselves. Suddenly, images appeared in the air above the platform. The images showed space, but not as they knew it. This was the galaxy from 10,000 years ago, full of young civilizations and peaceful worlds. Then the images changed, showing something that made everyone in the temple step back in fear. Dark ships appeared at the edge of the galaxy. They were not built by any known species. Their hulls seemed to absorb light, just like the sword's blade. As the ships moved deeper into the galaxy, planets went dark behind them. The Shadow Swarm, Amy whispered, reading from her tablet. This is what the Guardians were fighting. The images continued to tell their story. World after world fell to the dark ships. Entire species vanished without a trace. The Shadow Swarm consumed everything in their path, leaving only empty space behind. But then the images showed the Guardians fighting back. They were not a single species, but alliance of different peoples working together. They built massive defense stations and powerful weapons. Most importantly, they built ships that could evacuate entire populations from doomed worlds. They weren't trying to win the war, Danny said, understanding flowing into him from the sword. They knew they couldn't beat the Shadow Swarm. They were buying time for others to escape. War Chief Grant watched the images with growing respect. They were true warriors, fighting battles they knew they would lose to save people they would never meet. The images showed the final battle. The Guardians had gathered their remaining forces around a single world, making their last stand. They fought bravely, but the Shadow Swarm was too powerful. One by one, the Guardian ships fell. But just before the end, something changed. The Guardian fleet suddenly disappeared, along with the Shadow Swarm ships they were fighting. The Dark Invasion simply stopped. What happened to them? Lady Nyxera asked. Danny felt the sword's warmth increase. More knowledge flowed into his mind, knowledge that made him both excited and terrified. They didn't just disappear, he said slowly. They went somewhere else. Somewhere outside normal space, where they could keep fighting the Shadow Swarm forever. New images appeared, showing a place that hurt to look at. It was neither space nor planet, but something in between. In this strange realm, the battle between the Guardians and the Shadow Swarm continued, locked in eternal combat. They trapped themselves and their enemies in another dimension, Amy breathed. The ultimate sacrifice. But the images weren't finished. They showed the Shadow Swarm slowly winning even in their prison dimension. The Guardians were fewer in number, and they couldn't replace their losses. Eventually, they would fall. And when they did, the Shadow Swarm would break free and return to finish what they had started. When? Sage Crineth asked, his mental voice tight with concern. The crystal platform showed new symbols, ones that Danny somehow understood. Soon. Maybe 10 years, maybe less. The Guardians are almost gone. Silence filled the temple. The representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species stood quietly, thinking about what they had learned. So what do we do? Ben Carter asked. How do we fight something that defeated an entire galaxy? Danny felt the sword pulse in his hands. The Guardians left instructions. This whole planet is actually a giant communication device. It can contact their forces in the other dimension. The crystal platform projected a new set of images. They showed a network of similar temples on planets throughout the galaxy. All of them were connected, all waiting for someone to activate them. A galaxy-wide defense network, Jake said with wonder. But it's been dormant for 10,000 years. Waiting for someone worthy to awaken it, Amy added. All eyes turned to Danny. The young engineer looked scared but determined. He raised the sword, and the crystal platform responded with brighter light. I can activate the network, he said. But there's a cost. Someone has to stay here to operate it. To become the link between our dimension and where the Guardians are fighting. What do you mean, stay here? Jake asked. Danny's hand tightened on the sword. The person who activates the network becomes part of it. They can't leave this planet. They become the new Guardian, forever. The temple fell silent again. This was not just about lifting a sword anymore. This was about someone giving up their entire life to save the galaxy. There has to be another way, Ben said firmly. You're just a kid. You have your whole life ahead of you. And if I don't do this, nobody has any life ahead of them, Danny replied. The Shadow Swarm will come back and destroy everything. War Chief Grant stepped forward. His huge frame cast a shadow over the young human. I will do it. My people are warriors. This is what we live for. No, Sage Crineth said. My mind is more advanced. I would be better suited to operate such complex systems. Lady Nyxera shook her head. Neither of you understands advanced technology like my people do. I should be the one. But the sword in Danny's hand grew brighter, and the crystal platform responded only to him. No matter what the aliens offered, the ancient systems recognized only one person as worthy. "It has to be me," Danny said quietly. "The sword chose me, and the network will only accept the sword's chosen guardian." Jake put his hand on Danny's shoulder. "Son, you don't have to do this. We can find another way." Danny looked at his captain, then at Amy and Ben, the people who had become like family to him during their travels. He thought about his real family back on Earth, his parents and his little sister. He thought about all the families on all the worlds throughout the galaxy. "Captain," he said, "remember when you recruited me? You said that exploring space wasn't about glory or treasure. You said it was about making sure there would always be a future for humanity." Jake nodded, his throat tight. "Well," Danny continued with a small smile, "I guess this is my chance to make sure there's a future for everyone." He turned back to the crystal platform. The sword felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of the responsibility it carried. With one choice, he could save the galaxy. But that choice would cost him everything he had ever hoped to be. Danny Walsh, 25-year-old engineer from a small farm on Earth, looked around at the aliens who had spent days trying to prove their superiority. None of them had been able to lift the sword. But when a child was in danger, when someone needed protection, the ancient weapon had responded to the most human thing of all.